Welcome to another edition of Two
Irish
Guys Discussing Software. Here we are again. We are at the end of May 2021, sitting in the office. Thank God we're here.
Nice to be back.
Yeah, nice to be here. We're going to feel a bit of normality. And we have a great podcast for you today with a great guest. We're going to talk about your favorite topic, sales.
Sales, yeah.
And we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of software sales and sales tactics and
Nice.
all of those good things. And we've got Paul Lanigan, my old friend Paul Lanigan. He actually recently participated, you remember, our town hall, company-wide town hall event the other week.
It was really good. Yeah.
And he's a veteran podcaster himself. He has his own podcast on sales leadership. He thankfully invited me on it recently. I told him actually at the end of it he should have had you, not me. He had the wrong guest, but maybe he might fix that later. Paul is the managing director of Sandler Training Ireland and is a trainer. Obviously, he's met many, the good, the bad, and the ugly salesperson over the years. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, we've a few good, bad, and ugly stories for you later.
Excellent. Yeah. So how are you?
I'm great. I mean, you're looking fantastic. I think you're all dressed up, suited and booted. I don't know why. It's an audio podcast.
Well, I was, you never know. There's a camera there that they might use some of the images. No, actually, I actually was at an event earlier.
Right.
I was on.
Didn't tell us.
Yeah. No, I was at actually a press conference in the Press Club in Brussels, virtually from here, Dublin. Yeah.
Sweet. So,
I'm involved in we support the Free ICT organisation, which lobbies legislators in Europe, the Commission and MEPs. Mm-hmm. So we actually published this week a software paper.
Right.
And the software paper was drafted by Dan Sheffett, well-known lawyer based in Paris, Danish lawyer.
The Right to Be Forgotten, Dan.
The Right to Be Forgotten, Dan, absolutely.
Yeah.
Who is a
great story.
Yeah, we might actually get back on this podcast because he's a very interesting angle around product liability obligations on software vendors. So the paper specifically was around intellectual property rights. And the fact that IP is typically 70 years, as you probably know. And technology, I mean, the most you're using technology is at absolute most is 10 years, but actually it's increasingly less. So the rights are retained. So we put a paper together to give to the Commission and legislators around that. So I dressed up.
Where could I find that if I went looking?
Oh yeah, it'll be up on Free ICT's website as we have a recording of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll have a recording of the press briefing. Some really interesting things that Dan said. So
Great.
Very much in the two guys discussing software. Irish guys, even.
Yeah.
Domain, yeah. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So it was great to go to an event.
Yeah.
It's finally go to an event. And speaking of events, we had our own.
I know. Empower.
I know.
Yeah. 2021. Fantastic.
We actually really well. We had 250 registrations.
Best event I've been at this year. No doubt. Like by far.
Well, you didn't have to participate, but we had honestly a really good turnout. I mean, Joanne Rosenberger from Gartner,
the inimitable Joanne.
What a job!
She's fantastic. Yeah,
she's just so knowledgeable, but so entertaining. And clear and decisive. It's just...
Yeah, she knows her subject matter.
She does. She had the what she calls the 4 T's, the tips, tactics...
Templates. Terms and conditions and timing.
Timing,
yeah. And I know fantastic stuff. And I saw her, I think, was it 2018 maybe? She opened up 2018, 2019, you're good on dates, when she opened up the Gartner IT sourcing and procurement event. I think it was in...
Well, the original one was in Orlando. Yeah. That's the first time. I met her in 2016, actually.
Yeah, and I was like, I said, geez, this lady can present, you know. But she's got substance, you know. But her tactics are great, and some of them, I'm sure Paul, who's on, would be able to talk about. Really cool stuff about, knowing how does the sales rep get paid. Like, knowing how they get paid their commission can help you understand how they want to negotiate, or really understanding the contracts, like looking at the detail. So you can look at the detail, but she has templates, so guides which she's hand out to her clients. And then the classic one is holding out for a better deal, knowing the timing of their end of year, so you can hold out around a quarter. but also reading their quarterly results so you can see what are they actually looking to sell in this period. So you know what are the products that they're likely to be more compensated on. So really clever stuff.
And she was very complimentary about us and the fact that using our service as one of those tips and tactics
as a leverage.
Yeah.
No, it's great. Like one of the other thing she said, which was clever, I thought was, you know, when the renewal comes around, even if it's Oracle, SAP, IBM, it doesn't really matter. They just expect you to renew. They send you the renewal letter or the renewal notice 90 days out, and it's like a machine just churns out these documents.
There's no selling.
There's no selling. It's just here's our paper.
Yeah.
90 days, 60 days, 30 days, comes out of a Passport Advantage thing.
I had a customer used to call that order taking.
Order taking,
yeah.
Sure, you could sit by the pool and just wait for the thing to come in over your phone fax that we used to do years ago. But she said, why don't you go to tender on the renewal and say, actually, I can get databases or middleware or storage or whatever it might be from all of these other vendors, and I'm going to go to market because actually it's much easier to swap stuff out than it used to be.
Yeah.
You know, so she made a good point that don't be afraid. So imagine if, you know, you get IBM for their next renewal cycle said, oh, geez, we actually have to do some work. We have to write a response to a tender.
Yeah.
They're not built to do it. Yeah. Anyways, great stuff.
There was, and we had a great session from Bob from Citizens, Srini from T-Mobile, and Eric with Josh on actually when you have all those tips and tactics, actually how do you get stakeholder approval? So obviously Citizens and T-Mobile are customers of ours, and they did a cracking job talking about how they actually went around their organization and actually got people to sign up to this, because it is, you know, it's some of these journeys are challenging journeys to go through. So
well, it's classic stuff. You need to
totally
know who the key decision makers are and get to them. You spoke about that at an event a couple of years ago, didn't you?
Yeah, we talked about the snakes and the ladders.
Stop the block.
Yeah, stop the block and snakes and ladders.
Analogy.
To take it through the journey. So it's the same challenge. The challenge, and the bigger the organization, the more tricky it is, and the more applications, systems you're looking at, and more software packages you're looking at. It touches different parts of the business. So you got to get everybody's buy-in to the journey.
Yeah, and it's not easy. You know, they acknowledge that it's not easy. You got to roll up the sleeves and take people on. So,
and we had a cracking session by Pierce O'Donnell and Kuhn Dignan on tips and tactics, but this time around IBM licensing and how to navigate. That's such a complex word. We've talked about it before. I mean, so many things there.
They know their stuff, though.
They don't make it easy for you, but people like Pierce and Kuhn know that area so well. They did a cracking job. We've had Pierce on this podcast.
Yeah, and we've talked about the fact that, you know, if you're having challenges with understanding this stuff, you know, bring in people who know. Like, don't try and defend yourself. Bring in defense, and those guys, you know.
We had Pierce on the podcast. He was talking about the time the audits that were going on, but I mean, they take advantage of all those license terms.
Yeah, I have a little story about that coming up as well.
Oh, very good. We're looking forward to that. And then we had Tom Nimblett from TIA with Rowan, our co-founder. Ron O'Donoghue, they were talking about the value, looking at how they can maximize the value of it. So actually, the day was cracking, and you know what? We had a great end of session with our old favorite, IBM. We spent 40 minutes on a chat. We had Cliff Starren, who's the managing editor of Computer Weekly in the UK. He kind of moderated a session with myself, Eric Cunningham from Pass Advisors, who's out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Ron Belt, who's a financial M&A specialist out of Amsterdam. So we actually talked about a load of things. Actually, we talked about IBM's share price. We talked about IBM selling off. So many things we've talked about here.
Yeah. What's the next asset they'll sell, I think was the question.
All the things they've sold to date, what are they going to sell next? I mean, actually, one that'd be interesting for Paul, actually, is this reduction of, 15,000 customers or whatever number of focused customers that IBM had, and they're hundreds of thousands down to 500 globally. What does that mean?
Well, they've broken up their customer base into two categories: 500 that they care about, and everybody else.
I know.
I think that's how they describe it.
I know. It's absolutely unbelievable. Yeah.
And the experience from the street, from what I hear, is that customers are getting called now by, lots of sales reps in inverted commas who represent the part of IBM that they care about, because there isn't just one person to talk to. There isn't a client exec who'll guide you through, to the brand guy. All the brand guys are individually calling the customer saying, I'm your sales rep. And the customers are just totally confused, going, like, who do I talk to? Do I talk to 10 people?
Yeah,
you know.
No, it's totally and we see it with their own people, and it's reasons people are coming to us. They're getting the service.
Yeah.
They're getting a response. They're getting
the feedback from the
talk to.
market is the street is that they're not particularly happy.
Yeah, and it's not exclusive to IBM, but yeah, any of these enterprise players been around a long time. They're coming up with crazy ideas. IBM's moved to the open source. We talked about Red Hat. We talked about the big story we had a couple of weeks ago was the Kyndryl split out. But has there been any other news about IBM out there? I mean, because we probably covered it all at the Empower, did we?
Well, there's a few. We covered quite a bit about Empower, so we won't go on about them too much today, but it's kind of results season a little bit, not just the market results, obviously people doing their exams in college and school and coming out and wondering if they got an A or a B or here in Ireland a H1. So IBM recently got a grade.
What did they get?
They got an A minus. They were an A minus, you know.
Were they pleased with that?
Downgraded by the S&P. I don't think they reacted too much to it. It's just good to see that they got a minus and they were downgraded. But they're downgraded because over doubts about the company's ability to manage their debt. Their debt load now stands at 56 billion, quite a lot. And it's growing because of, you know, the acquisition spree of Arvind Krishna at the moment. He spent about a billion in acquisitions in the first quarter. So they're increasing their debt.
But it's interesting. We just talked about that just for a minute. I know we don't want to spend too long on IBM, but it's the same with many of these companies. If you look at IBM and what these organizations, they've been spending their money on two things. Like this came up at the Empower event. They're spending their money on either buying back the shares, so they're still generating cash. Yeah. Or they're spending their money on really poor acquisitions that by the time they sell them, spending huge money, like billions of dollars. They bought a company there only the other week for $1 billion. And
was it Turbonomic?
I think it was Turbonomic, yeah. So they're doing this all the time. And then by the time they flip the companies, they're worth a fraction.
Yeah.
You know, some of them are selling off for less than 100 million. You know, it's kind of madness.
We talked about this. You know, are they creating or consuming? You know, this is very much consuming. But I mean, they're buying these companies to bolster their hybrid cloud and AI capabilities. So you know, they've decided they're going to go down the hybrid cloud and AI route, but yet they don't have the internal capabilities, so they're having to buy the capability. Yeah. So they're selling off their legacy. They've launched Kyndryl, you know, wherever it's going.
Kyndryl, yes.
And then they don't have the skills and the capability to grow in the business that they're targeting strategically. So they're having to buy that into the company. So it's interesting.
Any other the big mega vendors, software vendors doing anything exciting out there?
Yeah, well, Microsoft are in the news. Actually, they were in the local news, which was interesting.
Their founder was all over the news.
Bill?
Yeah, well, I heard about him and the Daily Mail online, and himself and Melinda and staff and Jeffrey. We're not here to talk about any of those things. The Jeffrey Epstein story.
I didn't pick up. That wasn't a software story, so I wouldn't have picked up. I probably do look in the Daily Mail for some tabloid for this. But,
sorry, I think we'll move on. So
we'll move on from Jeffrey Epstein for sure. But their Irish registered subsidiary, which many of you will not have heard of, called Microsoft Round Island One. It's a holding company and it registered.
What did they make?
Well, they recorded a profit of 314 billion last year and paid a dividend to the parent company of just 55 billion. And quite remarkable, actually, because they have no employees. So take it out of that.
It's one of these brass plates.
Yeah, they have 3 directors, though.
Oh, so 3 people?
Yeah, US based.
Oh, so that's like 100 billion each. Very efficient. They're very good sales guys. Well, let's see.
Yeah, so they're registered here, but they're not tax domiciled here. They're tax domiciled in Bermuda. I think we've read all the stories about the complicated tax structures, but it's all legal and above board. They do have an operating entity, as people know, maybe not everybody in the podcast knows, in Ireland, which recorded revenues of 47 billion. So Microsoft Irish operations here, very close to our office here in Sandyford, and profits of just under 2.3 billion and paid 342 million. Doesn't sound like a lot in tax, but yeah, 314 billion of profit for a company with no employees.
I wonder what their target will be next year. You know, the 3 sales guys.
Yeah. So
that's not a bad contribution. I just think there's a bad smell off that. We'll move on.
We'll move on.
We'll move on. Our old friend Larry's company. How are they doing?
Larry, So they've also been downgraded. So actually, it was quite interesting because they were downgraded by Oracle recent to what is known as equal weighting by the analysts. So
they were downgraded by Oracle.
Downgraded by Oracle was downgraded by Barclays.
Barclays, okay, sorry, yeah.
Kind of mixing up my metaphors and words here, but to equal weighting, which means hold, right? And probably because the shares have increased, they probably hit a target at which Barclays don't think they can go past. But only a couple of months back, Barclays upgraded them to overweight, which meant they were saying buy. And then 2 months later, they're now saying they've downgraded them. So it's a bit flip-floppy on Barclays' behalf.
Okay, yeah.
But what they're basically saying is they can't see any real acceleration in growth. They can't see a path to, further gains. And they've kind of hit their peak. So they're looking for kind of business accelerators in their core, but they just can't see them.
I bet you they must be really looking after their customers, as they boasted recently on their talked about how many wins they had against SAP. Are they really looking after the customers still?
I mean, in typical fashion, we talked about the good, the bad and the ugly of sales. We talk about ABC, which Paul, who's coming on, would probably know as always be closing. Not in Oracle's world. We all know it, and our listeners would know it as Audit, bargain, close. But this is a classic. I mean, as we were discussing earlier, we've recently had our own health service executive covertly attacked.
Critical. I mean, I'll talk about trying to attack the health system. It's outrageous.
Disgusting.
Whatever about weaknesses that might be there, it's just outrageous.
Yeah. So you're attacking critical infrastructure, health system obviously already under pressure, and they're doing criminal activity. But it's covert. But this is overt activity.
What do they do?
So essentially, what they did was they pulled software support and maintenance on kind of essential energy generation, and the firm being Eskom in South Africa.
Okay. Oh yes.
So, and they did it over the fact that they said that Eskom are running too much software. They said they were running more software than they were entitled to run, right? And they said that they had underpaid by $500 million. Okay, so this is obviously always in dispute. The big mega firms, the mega vendors always come up with a big number, and then they'll always settle for something much smaller. So this was in sharp dispute.
This is outrageous.
Outrageous, yeah. So what happens is obviously the CEO of Andre de Ruyter, the CEO of Eskom, says, look, there's no way we're paying that. They were in sharp dispute. But I'll tell you what we'll do, Oracle. We'll pay you what we think we owe you. Okay, and then we can resolve the dispute, but we'll pay you something now, and then we'll pay you what we resolve to be the final number. They said, no, we want our money, so we're going to cut support. So what happened was then Eskom actually had to issue an urgent procurement tender to the third-party software market for Oracle software support, so that they could get support for mission-critical systems. And as it turned out, $500 million was just a ruse. It was actually, it's come down from last recording number to 41 million, so less than a tenth of what they said they owed. Now Eskom say they only own about 12 million, so they were saying, we think it's 12 million, but they start with 500, they come down to 41, and in the meantime they cut off support. It's just crazy stuff. And
I hear that's crazy, absolutely. I mean, and we know Oracle has survived off perpetual licenses. I believe the perpetual license is not dead.
Perpetual license, yeah. I mean, it isn't. We have Micro Focus, which I suppose good old-fashioned perpetual license saves have saved their H1, and they've turned around rather unexceptional trading figures on the back of that. And from reading what they've said, it's due to sales execution improvements. So some sales training, some better awareness from their sales team, and also bringing in a smaller number of deals earlier in the cycle. So good selling, if you can get the deals in early, right? Bolster your numbers, but they put it down to better sales execution.
And do they have a big software as a service kind of business model? They're just your traditional.
They're just your traditional vendor. Yeah, I mean they've been struggling since they bought HPE back in 2016. I think they spent 8.8 billion on it. They've struggled with. They sold off an unprofitable Suez company, so they've kind of had struggles, but they've recovered. But it's good to see that good old-fashioned sales execution has pulled them back from the brink.
Right. Yeah. I'd love to. This is a good time to bring Paul in on this conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because Paul, you know about sales training. Paul Lanigan, I believe you're there. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And yourself?
I'm really, really good. It's good to see you again. And I mentioned earlier that you come in on our town hall together, which was really, really good. I enjoyed interacting with you after you used to train me back in the old days, how to sell.
No, nobody needed to teach you how to sell, Tomás. You're a natural, that's for sure.
Well, I'll remember to also have a very nice compliment next time I'm talking live. Thank you so much.
Not a compliment, it's a fact.
Listen, we've been talking here about a bunch of different things that have happened, and we had a bit of a summary earlier about our events, which we're really proud of. And you know a little bit about our podcast. You have your own podcasts, and you've had some great guests on the podcast, excluding me. So you know what this is all about. One of the things we do on this show, Paul, is we're analysing, we're looking at the big enterprise software players, the traditional ones, the IBMs, the Microsofts, the Oracles. Talked about Micro Focus there, SAP, the traditional legacy business enterprise vendors. You know really well from your own experience. You've worked in them, you've trained many of them over the years, the sales teams here in Ireland and overseas. And we always are trying to figure out how come they've seemed to, in our humble opinion, to have changed quite radically to be almost anti-customer. You know, companies were proud of their expertise and their skills in training their people. I mean, I went through IBM Sales School, which was a 6-month training program. I mean, unbelievable training program. I mean, it still stands to me to this day. But I mean, and you look at that story there about Micro Focus, it just shows if you train your people, even if you're selling what would consider to be the old technology, the perpetual licenses, it can work, can't it?
It can, but your point about the customer part is an interesting one. I think it's overrated, and I think you should probably qualify that. I think if you're big enough that you can afford to not be as customer centric as a smaller player. You see it all the time. You used to see it with Ryanair as a perfect example most people can identify with. Now, I think they've changed their game for sure. But for a long time, it was like, screw the customer. And I've seen it with some of the big players as well. And to understand it and why they can get away with it is you just got to put yourself into the mindset of somebody who's buying that technology, is that they will put up with slow response times, one-sided agreements, because at the end of the day, they've just got a project to deliver and they know the technology is the right technology for them. They believe that. And you know, the old adage, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. So you can get away with a lot of that. And therefore you need to be significantly better at selling to compete against that, because already the pitch is skewed to the advantage of the big player, because the big player is, in the mind of a buyer, is usually a safer bet. Even if the technology solution isn't the optimum, it's a safer bet because I won't get in trouble for picking one of the big companies. That was safe. But if I make a bet, and I saw this with a company once. There was a company, they made internal stents, and they were an outsourced manufacturer of medical devices that went inside your body. You know, highly tolerant machining going on there. And they wanted to partner with a logistics partner in the Far East. So they were manufacturing a lot in Taiwan, and they needed to make sure that they had a good logistics partner in place. They had a big procurement process, brought it down to a final one. And the CTO, who told me this story, went to the CEO and said, "We've been through the process, months of work, we selected this company." And the CEO looked at it and went, "Who are they? I've never heard of them." He said, "Well, they're the selection we want to go with, and I want to run it by you before we announce it. We went through a detailed process. They're the best." The CEO, "Yeah, but nobody's ever heard of them." When something goes wrong, as it inevitably does with logistics, who are they? What questions are they going to ask? Who selected them? Mm. And so he said, by the way, it's your decision, but I'm going to give you 24 hours to dwell on it. And he came back later and he said, "We're going to open up the process again." And they ended up selecting FedEx instead. Even though FedEx didn't have the expertise and knowledge, the domain knowledge of medical devices that have to be kept at certain temperatures and humidity levels and so on. Even if they weren't the best, it didn't matter. Everybody knows FedEx. And so there is an element of that you're up against. And partly in selling, you've got to be able to dig out those issues at the very beginning and put it on the table and say, look, we're not a well-known brand. What happens when somebody comes and questions the fact that you may want to go with a company that nobody's ever heard of, when the other options are IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, and so on? What's going to happen then? And have those conversations early in the process so that you don't waste a ton of time between those highly conservative organizations that are always going to go with what they perceive as the safe option rather than the best value option.
So the training then you'd give to a smaller player at that enterprise selling level and to an incumbent, which let's call them incumbent, the bigger players who have been around a lot longer. Yeah, you've got to be better at selling, clearly, at the smaller player, but you got to have different skills, don't you?
You do, and you got to have a different mindset. You got to be able to engage with them and say, and ask the question. And this is a question a lot of people run away from. And said, look, you've got a couple of options here. You know, big companies who are well established in this market. Why not go with them? Mm-hmm. And then shut up. And the answer will be telling. If they can't say, well, we don't want to go with them because A, B, and C, then you're on a hiding to nothing. I mean, that's not a guarantee you'll get the business, but at least it starts the conversation around the issues and challenges that they perceive they're not being addressed with. Or it could be a sense of maybe they feel they're being ignored and exploited. Like you mentioned earlier about IBM now focusing in on 500 companies. Well, I don't know about the ones at the bottom, but certainly if I was 501, 502, 503, I'd be feeling a little bit miffed right now. I don't know necessarily that would be enough reason to change, but would it be an interesting conversation to have with somebody and say, well, how do you feel about the fact that they no longer want to deal directly with you? And how much of an issue is that for you? Because sometimes, you know, it's the reason people leave companies because they're upset with their manager. People leave vendors as well because of maybe how they've been treated, even though maybe the solution might be the best technical fit. There's the emotional element as well. Is if I feel slighted to the right individual, again, and that's part of selling, is understanding the makeup of the psychology of the individuals you're speaking to. Some people wouldn't be bothered by that. Others would be severely put out. And it's not important enough that they're put out, but unless they have the influence and power to change decisions in their organization, they can be put out as much as they want, and it's not going to make a damn bit of difference. So there's so much more going on than just showing up with features and benefits of what you do. A lot of it is understanding the landscape and navigating your way through the psychology and the processes and the systems and as in the decision-making systems, and saving time as well. A good seller is almost happier with a no than they are with a let's discuss. Yeah. Because a no is okay. I know what to do with a no. That's the KNOW. Yeah. I know what to do with a no. Yeah. And that can, because if I'm saving myself time in chasing all of these dead ends, well, what can I do with that time? Now I can focus on those people who are maybe a little bit more risk adverse, or at least willing to have that conversation with a vendor that may not be part of that big tech company patch, and say, you know what, I'm a champion of the little guy. When it's David versus Goliath, I'm always going to cheer on David. Now, I need to make sure that David is well armed, and that when David wins, and I'm not going to be left exposed here, but I need somebody willing to at least take that decision. And that's always the challenge you have. I remember before I did this with Sandler, I was working for a small startup company selling into telcos. And it was always the same old story. Who are you? You're a risk. And I remember talking to a procurement manager. Years later, I interviewed him. I used to work with him years ago in Motorola. And he was the procurement purchasing manager in O2, I think, at the time. And we were talking about this concept of the best technical solution. And I put it to him. I said, look, I want you to imagine that I'm coming to you as the CEO of a small tech, very innovative company. We've developed this solution that is both better and cheaper than what you've got. What would you do? And he says, I'd probably run a mile. I said, why? It's better and it's cheaper. He says, I'm not interested in cheaper. He said, my job is to protect the company. And if I see something that has any kind of perceived risk, I don't care how cheap it is. You could give it to me for free. And it won't make a difference. And it's just the willingness and ability to understand that that's how people are, and to flesh that out.
Yeah, but that's a mindset though as well. I mean, and understanding the culture of the company. I mean, I've spoken to lots of companies who will, which is great. They'll tell me early, we're not for you, and you walk away quickly. I think the problem with some sellers is that, maybe if they don't have a great pipeline, they don't want to hear no. So, and it's not, they're afraid to ask, why not? Why would you not do it? I mean, I one of the best pieces of advice I got, sorry, it wasn't from you, Paula, but from the training industry, was not to ask, why would you buy? But very early on, ask, why would you not buy? And there's many reasons for that. We wouldn't buy because of risk, or we wouldn't buy because we don't know you, but there could be lots of other reasons. And you ask different stakeholders in the company that you're talking to the same question. So you ask the head of procurement that question, you ask the CIO the question, are there any reasons why you wouldn't? And then you'll get a broader spectrum of why nots, and you can spot them early. But if you don't have a strong pipeline, salespeople don't want to ask, because then that's the only deal they've got going for the quarter, and they look exposed. But it benefits them. They can just move on.
Absolutely. And it is the flip side of what we started with, which is, why not stick with what you have? Whether that's a vendor or a system, a way of doing it, doesn't matter. It covers both. Why not stick with the current system? And then you got to shut up and listen very carefully to what you're hearing. And that if it's anything like, well, we're always looking for something new, always looking for something that may be a little bit cheaper, they're not doing anything, because they don't get rewarded for bringing in something that's a little bit less expensive. My father-in-law, who used to be a senior buyer within, well, he's a project manager, but had buying responsibilities within Guinness, Diageo, was the Guinness at the time. And he worked a lot with, obviously, packaging and bottling plants and so on. And he was known for always going over budget. And I remember chatting to him about this. I'll never forget it. He said, nobody is ever going to thank me for saving some money if the project doesn't come in on time. Sure. That was his view. Wasn't his money, didn't care. People will spend an extraordinary amount of money to cover their ass of other people's money. And I just think it's that realistic thinking about how the landscape is rather than how we wish it were, is a really important element of selling. At least that's what I took out of when I started first, was that it's so much about just trying to identify the truth. What's reality? Yeah. That's the starting block.
And there's a different truth for the big guys versus the small guys, isn't there? Because you talked about earlier, I mean, the tactics, the skills that you need, quite clearly, I would imagine it's a lot more entertaining or it's challenging to train the guys working for the smaller companies than the bigger companies, because they need different skills. I mean, clearly, one of the skills the big guys need is the order taking skill. We're watching the fax machine come through sometimes, but actually, we've talked about some of the skills. Well, the things that they use, which are quite astonishing. Some of them, the ABC.
Yeah,
which is well known as always be closing in a sales world. According to documentation that was given to us by a lawyer in the US, they have a tactic of called audit, bargain, close.
Yeah.
So they use the audit.
But it's not a skill; that's a threat.
So here's the interesting thing.
Is it a skill? It probably is a skill.
Well, it is and it isn't. So it does, but it does require a brass neck, I think.
Brass neck, brazen, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But I remember sitting down with a guy once, and in my head, I was sitting down to do some coaching. I was going to observe him making some calls and how he got set up. And so I sat, and he opened up this database he had beside him. And I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but it was a database he had beside him. And he called up this guy, and I was expecting a conversation around the issues and challenges of the business and what they were trying to do and so on. No, it wasn't. It was, you're using X number of instances of our software and you're only licensed for Y, and there's a gap there, and I'd like to talk to you about it. And I said to him afterwards, I said, I was expecting this. He said, no, he said, this is a whole lot easier. He said, it's like shooting fish in the barrel. And, are they appealing to a certain fear and pain in the prospect when they do that? Yeah, but and legally they have massive leverage, because once it's established that you're out of your licensing, whatever's in your licensing agreement, once you're out of that, they basically can come in and audit the hell out of you. And the same company, so this was an inside sales group, same company in their field sales group had a name for it. They call it drive-by selling. They would literally drive up to this company, check it out on their phone. They're able to access their own systems, knock on the door, ask for the CFO, tell the CFO, it's in your interest to step out of here, saying, look, we could do you for 3 million, give me $1 million, and we'll call it quits. And they would literally make their year's target with a couple of those calls. So, and it's not selling, it's debt collecting.
Yeah.
Right. So I would never hire somebody who had that experience if I wanted them to sell in a small company.
No, it's not solution selling.
It's not. No, it's not. But they're called salespeople. And if you looked at their income and their commission record, it would look like they were high performing sales reps. But then you put them into a real company where you have to survive on your skills alone, and they just fall apart.
Yeah.
And it's often a temptation of smaller companies to hire salespeople from bigger companies because they think they have that big company experience and they're able to do big deals. And often the case is not true. Now, in their defense, there's some wonderful salespeople. Some of the best ones I've ever met are in some of these companies. But it's not always the case, far from it.
But there's probably room for another podcast here, which is about when you're hiring these people, put them through the appropriate process to tease that out, that actually... Have they been doing any selling? What have they sold? How do they do it? How do they go about it? How do they uncover the opportunity? How do they do it? And when it's, actually it was you'll find out pretty quickly they haven't been doing any selling. They've just been doing debt collecting.
Yeah.
But that's a skill in itself, isn't it? Like that whole, finding the people.
It is, because you're right, Bernard. I would not be comfortable in that job as a debt collector, knocking on people's doors, saying, here's the only money. It's not me. Would I do it if there's no other option and I needed to feed my family? Yeah, but I wouldn't be comfortable at it. So it does require a persona to do it. There's no question about it. I'm not raining on that parade.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that let's not call it selling.
Yeah. Tell us more about the good guy you mentioned there, some of the best people, because I think the ABC, the Audit, Bargain, Close, definitely falls into either the bad or the ugly. You touched on some of the best salespeople you've met in these, anywhere.
Other than Tomás.
Other than me and Brendan, of course, that you've met are in some of these companies, and no doubt they are. Because it becomes a different sale later on in their career. Have they become so elevated? Have they stayed because they're so well paid, or what's the attraction for them to stay there?
So well paid is a big attraction, and they get a lot of kudos and a lot of awards. A lot of those big companies put a lot of money into presidents' clubs and other forms, and they pay really good money. If you're a top performer in one of those big companies, you could make $500,000 a year easily, and maybe $1 million in some of them, depending. And certainly when you were for on-premise software, they had massive commissions. But even multi-year contracts that are recognized for SaaS-based solutions, you can still make really, really good money. And what they have in common, the things I've seen over the years, because I always looked at this with a level of curiosity, is that the discipline and focus was enormous. That you'd often see with the really high performers, really approachable people, humble, but also when I say focused, they closed off a lot of things. Like I know if I went to some of these people and said, listen, I'm doing this podcast, will you come as my guest? They'd kind of look at it and going, okay, what's in it for me? Who am I going to be talking to? Is this going to help me with my pipeline? And if they couldn't answer those questions, it would be like, listen, Paul, thanks, but no thanks. And they'd be clear about it. And it's happened to me. And so they're very hard to get because they're so focused on what they're doing, that single track. And it's the discipline, and it's showing up every single day. Also, they get and are very good at identifying what people really care about. They know they don't care about their solutions, their hardware, their software, their services. They know that people are just want to solve a problem. And they're very good at bringing the right people together. They're good at understanding the politics. And I think a lot of those skill sets are not trained in the classroom by me or by their managers. They're earned on the street at 6 years of age, 7 years of age, when you're interacting with other kids around you and you want to persuade them to come play with you, or you're knocking on doors trying to raise money for a school building or whatever it is. that's where I believe a lot of the really successful ones are sculpted, and they'll have similar stories. Like you often hear about entrepreneurs, and you look into their background, and they're often from immigrant families, had to really, really work hard to get where they are. A lot of it was in the struggles and the obstacles that they had to overcome that honed them as individuals, that made them more resilient, and that made them more focused and insightful. It's also the same as true with salespeople. If you look into their background of how they grew up and what their family situation was like, what their friend circle was like, what you'll find is none of them had it soft. None of them did it. It gave them that edge. There's no two questions about it. It's not enough just to be smart and clever and understand how sales works. You've got to have that drive, that edge, that itch, that fire that's driving you on. You're never satisfied. Enough is never enough. It's not about the money. You're going to keep going because you're constantly at some subconscious level, you're proving something to yourself. You're proving something to somebody else who goes, maybe it's a teacher or a parent. You're going, see, I could do it. There's something in them.
Yeah. No, I can. That certainly resonates as an entrepreneur. That definitely resonates.
Yeah. When we want to get Tomás to do something, we say you're not going to be able to get there.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Like, absolutely. I can identify that. Listen, I was going to ask you, but you probably wouldn't be able to do it.
we know what makes them tick. Just like a little red rag. Just hold it.
Yes. Yeah. I can identify with that 100%. Yeah. 2007, February 2007, my wife and I, do we have time for a quick story?
Yeah, we do, yeah.
Yeah, so my wife and I, her sister and her husband were out in a restaurant, just chatting, it's post-Christmas, and we were talking about goals and things for the year, and my brother-in-law had trained twice for the marathon and hadn't done it. He had, with injuries and so on, by the end, he got to 20 miles, he had to, he never actually entered the race. He had injuries beforehand and had to pull out of the race. So he said his goal this year was he was going to do the marathon. It came to me and, oh, Paul, what are you going to be doing this year? And I was kind of a little bit circumspect about it. My wife said, maybe you should do the marathon with Mark. It'd be good for the two of you to go out, spend some time together and train together. And I looked at her and gone, you crazy? What, run? I mean, up to this point in my life, I had never run further than 2 miles. Ever. I just wasn't into sports as a kid. I was overweight, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you must be, I hated running, genuinely. I said, I hate running. She said, yeah, you're right. You're probably too old anyway.
Oh.
That was it. That April, we had done the 10K together. By the summer, we'd done 10 miles. And in October, I finished that line in 4 hours in the marathon. No question about it. And I wasn't even thinking, this will show you. It was just, it ignited something. It's that you can't do it. You're too old. You're past it. There's nothing that will fire. And that's not for everybody. This is why I remember I said earlier, you have to understand somebody's psychology. Somebody else might hear that and go, oh, do you think so? Oh, I suppose you're right.
Yeah.
Right? Different reaction. You got to understand the person you're talking to. What's gonna light that fire? And once you've lit the fuse, you don't need to do much more. That's the beautiful thing about it.
I've one last question for you, Paul. Just
illegal.
Yeah. I've one last question for you. We talked about earlier the 500 companies that are now in the top group, and everybody else who's in the also rans. Interestingly, obviously they will have people still trying to sell to the 501st company or 510th company. If you were talking to that rep who's now going to be dealing with and he's working for an IBM or an Oracle, he's got somebody that is pretty obvious they're going to be in bad shape, they're going to potentially have a negative view. What would be the number one tip you'd give that person, that sales rep?
So I'm talking to a rep who is now working with a customer who's outside of the exalted list.
And he's in the just outside category, yeah?
Yeah. I would, at one level, I would be wanting to empathize and really connect with the buyer to say, look, how do you feel about this? And just get that, let them vent, let them, if they feel slighted, some of them will, some of them won't, but if they do, I want them to get that out. But I'd also be then looking at, well, how can I sell this to them. Forget sell products. I'd be selling to them that this is actually in their best interest, that they're going to get more attention rather than less. I'll be selling to them the fact that, look, the way it used to be in the past was that if you spent more, you got more attention, and that's just unfair to customers like you. So what we decided to do was just hive them off, and that I can give you far more of my time and do that's how I'll be selling it to them. And that's what you're up against. So I wouldn't automatically assume that everybody is going to be upset, because I would imagine, because IBM are a smart company, you got to give them their kudos. A smart company that they've primed their reps on how to position the change, and that they should have been doing this for some time, even before it was announced. They should be positioning the change as good for the 600 company, the 700 size.
Well, we have a couple of stories from the street. Unfortunately, I think they should have had you in to help them with that, Paul, because one of the stories we heard was from one of the companies who's in that category of, I don't know what they're in the 500, but they're in the category of falling out of focus. They have telephone-based account managers. They get a call from the first guy saying, or an email, introduce themselves, let's set up a call. The day before that call, that has to be cancelled because the guy's changed role. Set up a second one, and so on. You can see the picture. So it sounds to me like they could have done with your help on that journey. And that's just not a training thing, that's an organizational thing.
Yeah, no, it is. And that shows maybe an element of arrogance. And if they really, really, really cared about their entire customer base, they should have done this. And if they haven't, then shame on them. What I would be doing with those outside the 500 now, I'd be saying, I said, listen, when you told IBM that you wanted things to stay the way they are and you wanted your account director the way you had them, how do they respond? And it's called, in psychology, it's called let's you and he fight. I'd set up an internal fight between them and tease out how upset they are over, and say, when you told them that you needed this, how did they respond? Well, they didn't get back to me. How did you feel about that? Well, I'm really pissed off. Enough to look at something else? Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, look, can't promise that I have everything that they provided, but certainly happy to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And then I'd go.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. You've got your own sales leadership podcast. I've listened to some fantastic people. Who's on next? Or when
I have a few of them stacking up. I had a wonderful conversation with Tom Castley yesterday. Tom is ex-Oracle, a real thought leader in sales. Just a wonderful guy to speak to. In fact, so much so he's agreed to be a regular guest, a monthly guest. People love. He's actually the last podcast I did with him, highest rating podcast. He has just a natural network, and he's a really, really super guy. I had Ganesh, but he's out already. I did a conversation with a guy this morning who's based in Florida, and it was at 10 o'clock. So he was up this morning at 4 o'clock for a 5 o'clock. That's dedication. And that was just really interesting, because very different type of personality, everything. And I love that, because beforehand, unless I know them, I'm kind of going beforehand, look, and I see the name and I don't know who they are, and I look them up on LinkedIn and I know very little about them, and I'm kind of, because I'm really antisocial, believe it or not. And it's a kind of, and then I have the conversation with them, and I love it, because they're so interesting. Yeah. So I keep going through that. I go down to my son, who's down in the office downstairs, and I said, it's happened again, Rian. I wasn't looking forward to this. I wanted to cancel it, because I had a bad night's sleep last night and I was tired, so I wanted to cancel it, but I said I couldn't let him down. I did it. And then I was delighted. And he says, you keep doing that. When are you going to bloody learn it? And maybe I'll never learn, but at least I know it. I'm aware of it.
Thank you, Paul. Stay there for a minute. We're gonna wrap up the show here.
All right. Take care, guys.
Yeah, appreciate that. That was, again, great content.
Fantastic. I love talking about selling.
Always
be closing.
Always be closing. Yeah,
my favorite movie, Glengarry Glen Ross.
That's
Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, cracking movie. Listen, thanks, Brendan. That was good.
Thank you, the boss.
We had good fun today. I'm glad I dressed my suit today for you.
Yeah, and it's good that you were at an event or a few events recently.
I have a face for radio, as you say.
You do.
Our face for podcast.
Sorry, man. You know.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, it's a 50. That's what happens. Anyway, listen, we will be back next month. Have another guest. We must try and do these more frequently.
Oh yeah.
On that note,
Let's have a chat about that.
on that note, goodbye. See you soon.
Take care.
Take care.